scanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, May 7th, 2021, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Glad to have you here. I just got into the studio, so I'm still even getting the show set up and getting the recording going because it has been a whirlwind here, week in the Idaho legislature, because they're just coming off of having a break from COVID. And then when they came back from that, the Idaho legislature had a scandal break out when former Representative Von Ellinger was accused of raping an intern not at the legislature, but one of the legislative interns. And they brought her in to testify, and she testified behind a curtain, trying to keep her identity secret. She's 19 years old. After the testimony, the supporters of this Von Ellinger chased her down in the Capitol hallways to try to film her. Her lawyers are there trying to protect her with a bunch of umbrellas so she can't be seen. And she's screaming. Her screams can be heard all the way back in the chamber. And just what a mess. We have another representative, Representative Giddings, who went and doxed her, which, if you know what that means, just identified who she was, so that these followers now can try to, embarrass her and humiliate her and so forth, which of course makes it so much more difficult for the next time something like this goes on. You want to have someone report, they're going to be afraid to, because of the results of it, because of what happens. And so this is just, embarrassing for the state of Idaho to have to be dealing with this, but yet here we are. And in spite of all that, in spite of having dealt with all of that, and now leading into what's going to be the longest legislative session in the history of this body, they still found time to create 2 new anti-marijuana bills. They already had 5. They already tried 5 anti-marijuana bills this legislative session. They had time to craft 2 more in the dead of night, bring them up the next day, vote on them, get them into the floor, vote on them there. Meanwhile, they can't get education funded. They can't figure out what the tax things are going to be. They keep trying to pass these laws to strip powers from the governor. It's just embarrassing, this legislative session. So, we'll tell you more about these bills coming up in our Behind the Headlines segment, let you know all about that. And we've also got coming up the cannabis headline news, and that, of course, will catch up on today's headlines, which, aside from the state of Idaho, marijuana is moving forward everywhere in the nation, literally everywhere else in the nation. Kansas, the last state, aside from Idaho, to not have any sort of medical program, even CBD medical. Kansas has passed a medical marijuana legalization bill. It just awaits a signature from the governor. So we'll talk about that. That's coming up in the news. Behind the headlines, I'll tell you about all 7 of the anti-marijuana bills that have gone down in the Idaho legislature this session. They sure found a lot of time to attack marijuana, I'll tell you that much. And then I've got the hearing. You'll hear about the shenanigans behind this hearing that I went to attend, 10 hours out of my day to speak for 3 minutes. But somebody had to do it, so by God, I did it. That hearing, I have the full audio, including Senator C. Scott Grow introducing this bill and the questioning from the Democrats on the committee, the 2 Democrats who voted in our favor. All that coming up and more on the Russ Belville Show, Idaho's marijuana podcast, coming to you live and direct from America's last absolute prohibition state. Now, let's get to the national news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News, brought to you every weekday by Radical Russ Radio at radicalruss.com, your 24-hour source for marijuana music and cannabis conversations. Subscribe today for just $4.20 at patreon.com/radicalruss. With your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, May 7th, 2021, I'm Russ Belville. A bill to legalize medical marijuana in Alabama is headed to the governor's desk following its passage by the legislature. After clearing 2 House committees last month, the measure passed the full chamber by a vote of 68 to 34 on Thursday. The Senate, which had previously approved an earlier version of the legislation in March, then signed off on the other body's changes in a 20-9 vote. The win came after opponents staged a lengthy filibuster on the House floor earlier this week, drawing out the process by making a series of speeches and asking questions until the end of the day's session at midnight approached. Those stalling tactics did not continue on Thursday, however. To qualify for the program, patients would have to be diagnosed with one of about 20 conditions, including anxiety, sleep disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, and intractable pain. Regulators would not be able to independently add additional conditions, leaving that decision up to lawmakers in future sessions. Governor Kate Ivey has not said whether she will sign or veto the bill. The Tennessee legislature on Wednesday sent the governor a bill to expand the state's limited CBD program and create a commission to study broader medical marijuana legalization. The Senate approved the bill on a vote of 19 to 12 on Tuesday. Then the House cleared it in a 74 to 17 vote on Wednesday. The bill would further allow patients with qualifying conditions to possess CBD oil that contains no more than 0.9% THC, which is 3 times greater than the federal definition of hemp. The current program's list of qualifying conditions would be expanded beyond intractable epilepsy to add Alzheimer's disease, ALS, cancer, IBS, multiple sclerosis, HIV/AIDS, and sickle cell disease. People would have to keep proof of their condition and a recommendation from a physician in order to possess the oil. But in order to obtain the medicine, Tennesseans would have to go out of state or obtain it illegally, as there is currently no means to lawfully purchase cannabis within the state. The Kansas House of Representatives on Thursday approved a bill to establish a medical marijuana program in the state. Days after clearing the Federal and State Affairs Committee, the bill advanced out of the full chamber in a 79 to 42 vote, and it now heads to the Senate. The legislation would establish a medical marijuana program for qualified patients. It lists about 24 conditions that would make a person eligible for cannabis, including Alzheimer's disease, cancer, Crohn's disease, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, post-traumatic stress disorder, and traumatic brain injury. It was amended on the floor to add lupus to the list of qualifying conditions, but a separate proposed revision to add insomnia and sleep disorders to the list failed. Smoking and vaping products would be prohibited, and an amendment to remove that prohibition was rejected on the floor. The bill would also not provide for home growing. The Texas House of Representatives on Thursday approved a bill that would require the state to conduct a study into the therapeutic potential of psychedelics like psilocybin and MDMA. This comes as numerous marijuana reform measures move through the legislature. The legislation, sponsored by Representative Alex Dominguez, passed by a vote of 134 to 12. It had advanced on second reading via a voice vote a day earlier. It now heads to the Senate. The bill would require the state to study the medical risks and benefits of psilocybin, MDMA, and ketamine for veterans in partnership with Baylor College of Medicine and a military-focused medical center. It was also amended to mandate a clinical trial into psilocybin for veterans with PTSD, in addition to a broader review of the scientific literature on all 3 substances. Last week, the House approved a bill to decriminalize marijuana possession, sending it to the Senate. Lawmakers also sent Governor Greg Abbott a bill to clarify that a positive marijuana test alone is not sufficient criteria for removing a child from their home. A GOP-led Wisconsin Joint Committee on Thursday voted to scrap the governor's budget proposal to legalize marijuana in the state, one of nearly 400 provisions that were eliminated. In a vote of 12 to 4, the Joint Finance Committee removed language that would establish an adult-use cannabis market and medical marijuana system. The move was widely anticipated in the Republican-controlled legislature, and it's led to calls from Governor Tony Evers and other Democratic policymakers to have residents put pressure on their representatives to support the administration's agenda. Evers released details of his proposed legalization legislation through his budget request in February. It would have allowed adults 21 and older, or qualifying patients, to purchase, possess, and cultivate marijuana for personal use. Residents could possess up to 2 ounces of marijuana, while out-of-state visitors could have up to 1/4 ounce. Adults could grow up to 6 plants for personal use. This has been your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, May 7th, 2021. I'm Russ Belville. Cannabis Headline News is heard at the top of every hour on Radical Russ Radio, and Friday's news is contained within the free Russ Belville Show live podcast. For daily downloads of Cannabis Headline News podcast to your device every morning, subscribe by becoming a patron of Radical Russ Radio. You're listening to the Russ Belville Show.
And we are Idaho's Marijuana Podcast. So glad to have you here. Take a short break, and we'll come back with a few more stories from other states across the country, catch up on some of the rest of the week's news, and we've got a behind the headlines to tell you all about what's happening here in the state of Idaho. And it's been a watershed year in the state as far as marijuana reform goes. More bills this year than I think any year prior. We'll wrap them all up for you in behind the headlines, plus a deeper look into the Idaho legislature and the number one enemy of marijuana in Idaho, Senator C. Scott Grow. Talk about irony. Be right back.
Almost busted in Laredo, but for reasons that I'd rather not disclose.
I smoke pot, and I like it a lot. Hi, this is Willie Nelson. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer to use than alcohol. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting responsible marijuana smokers in America. And to learn what you can do to help, please contact NORML at www.norml.org or call toll-free at 888-67-NORMAL.
The show was long and we was just sitting there, and we'd come to play and not just for the ride.
You're listening to The Russ Belville Show.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
You can find Radical Russ online everywhere.
Radical Russ here, reminding you that marijuana legalization doesn't just happen. Smart, dedicated activists have put their freedom and future on the line to make it happen. Like the activists at Vote Hemp. America was founded as hemp-growing colonies, and the folks at Vote Hemp are fighting to return hemp farming to prominence in the United States. You can learn more about hemp's history and its future by visiting votehemp.com. And keep it here on Radical Russ Radio for conversations with leaders from this organization, the best marijuana music, and the latest news about cannabis.
Welcome back, everyone. Idaho's Marijuana Podcast. I'm Radical Russ Belville. A few more stories happening across the country to illustrate how far behind the times the state of Idaho is. The Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who of course is a senator from the state of New York, actually appeared at the 420 rally. My good friend Steve Bloom from Celeb Stoner, former editor of High Times, introduced him. Here's the story. Addressing marijuana legalization supporters at a rally in New York this weekend, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer celebrated his home state's newly passed cannabis law and said it's time to bring the fight to the federal level.
We're all here because we know that we must move past the failed model of the war on drugs.
True.
For decades, this has been horrible. Young men and young women, disproportionately young men and women of color, have been arrested and jailed for even carrying small amounts of marijuana, a charge that came with exorbitant punitive penalties, a serious criminal record, and so many of them could never recover from that.
True. Amen.
That's Chuck Schumer speaking at the 420 rally in New York. Meanwhile, in Louisiana, the state already has a limited medical marijuana program, and the lawmakers there are looking to expand it. The Louisiana House of Representatives on Monday approved a bill that would expand the state's current limited medical marijuana program by allowing patients to purchase whole flower cannabis. They also advanced another proposal that would establish licensing fees for recreational marijuana if the state opts to legalize it under separate legislation. Members additionally gave the green light to a measure that's meant to align Louisiana's hemp program with the federal rules for the crop that were finalized and took effect under the U.S. Department of Agriculture last month.
Lawmakers in the state have been advancing a series of marijuana reform bills in recent weeks, but arguably the most consequential measure is one from Representative Richard Nelson that would establish a recreational cannabis market in the state. That legislation was approved by the House Administration of Criminal Justice Committee last week and is expected to come to the floor for consideration later this week.
This is why it's so interesting to hear the lawmakers in Idaho opine about how having medical marijuana or moving in any way to liberalize marijuana laws in the gem state is going to lead to horrible outcomes like we've seen in allegedly Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, and Denver. That's going to be a harder argument to keep making as we have places like Louisiana and Minnesota legalizing marijuana.
An 11th Minnesota House Committee on Wednesday approved a bill to legalize marijuana, the latest development in its long path to a vote on the floor, which is expected this month. House Majority Leader Ryan Winkler, Speaker Melissa Hortman, and other lawmakers filed the measure in February. It would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis and cultivate up to 8 plants, 4 of which could be mature. The provisions of an amendment from Walker clean up language that was changed previously by other committees and concern issues such as requirements for cannabis delivery business license applicants, standards for storing marijuana products, and the appropriation of funds for various agencies and boards involved in the administration of the cannabis program. The panel also accepted an amendment from Representative Pat Garofalo that directs remaining cannabis revenue to a tax relief account after implementation costs are covered and substance misuse treatment and prevention programs are funded.
The thing that sticks out to me about that story is that we're talking about a marijuana legalization bill in Minnesota that's cleared its 11th committee. 11 committees have looked at this bill. Meanwhile, in the state of Idaho, as you'll hear in the next segment, we've got bills that are dreamt up the night before, rushed into a committee hearing the next morning with no public input, no public notice, then voted on the Senate floor that very afternoon. No bill that I've dealt with this entire session has had any more than one committee hearing in the House and one committee hearing in the Senate. As far as I'm concerned, that's not enough consideration when we're talking about these bills that affect people's rights. And one other story that I want to tuck in here before we get to our safety briefing, and that one has to do with a study that disproves one of the long-standing stereotypes about marijuana consumers. In a stereotype-busting new study, researchers found that frequent marijuana consumers are actually more likely to be physically active compared to their non-using counterparts. For decades, anti-cannabis propaganda has cast marijuana consumers as unmotivated couch potatoes. But a study published in the Harm Reduction Journal on Thursday found the opposite to be true. A nationally representative analysis of accelerometer-measured sedentary behavior showed that people who frequently use marijuana, particularly those aged 40 and older, spend more time engaging in physical activity than non-users do. In general, they found that, quote, there's no significant difference between non-current cannabis users and light, moderate, or frequent cannabis users in minutes per day spent in sedentary behavior, end quote. The researchers also looked at the relationship between marijuana use, activity, and age, finding that people over 40 who consumed cannabis moderately spent an average of 16 more minutes engaged in moderate physical activity each day than non-users. Love that when the phone kicks in right in the middle of the show. Sorry about that. But marijuana smokers, we've long had studies that have shown we have lower body mass index than non-smokers. And some people attribute this to the fact that marijuana, being a natural herb, might also attract people who are into a more natural lifestyle, that eat better, that maybe get out into nature and appreciate it more. So whatever the correlation may be, it's just good to see that the old stoner stereotype of being lazy and amotivated is becoming debunked. And I hope that I can help to debunk that a little bit. If you've been following our work at Idaho Can, which is the Idaho Citizens Coalition for Cannabis, you can find them at idahocan.co and Idaho Can, Idaho CANN, on Twitter and Facebook. And on that Facebook page, I've been posting my videos as I go to the testimony at the State House. And yesterday, there's probably about 6 or 7 videos that I posted because I was there literally for about 10 hours, all to do 3 minutes of speaking, which you'll hear a little later on in the program. But it's just maddening when you're trying to represent and trying to stand up for people's rights, and the state government isn't posting when the meetings are going to happen. When they do, the meetings are happening hours late. There's no way anybody with a job, with a real schedule, with kids, would be able to even focus at all on these things. And so I'm glad I've got the opportunity to do it. We'll bring you more of that coming up in the show. So stay tuned. But first, we've got something important to get to. Aw, yeah, because that sound means it's 4:20 here in the Mountain Time Zone. Time for our union-mandated safety briefing. And remember, you're taking a 4:20 break in Idaho. You need to be very, very careful. Check out which way the wind is blowing, if you know what I mean.
Hi, I'm Radical Russ Belville, the sole producer of this 24-hour marijuana music and cannabis conversation stream I call Radical Russ Radio. As part of my mission to educate and entertain people about the need to end adult marijuana prohibition, I produce the Russ Belville Show podcast every week, available absolutely free wherever you get your podcasts. For those of you who'd like to help support my mission financially, you can become a Radical Russ Radio VIP at patreon.com/radicalruss or by clicking the link for Toker Talk Radio in the main menu. For just $4.20 a month, VIPs will receive the exclusive download of Hour 2 of my podcast, Toker Talk Radio, every week, as well as the 5-minute cannabis headline news every weekday. Upgrade to the $14.20 a month tier, and you'll get those podcasts and a set of custom patriotic pro-marijuana stickers from me every quarter. And if you can afford to support Radical Russ Radio at $44.20 a month, you get my podcast, and each quarter you receive a poster, then a mug, then a t-shirt, and finally a hoodie that proclaim your support for ending adult marijuana prohibition. I literally cannot do this without you. Your support enables me to continue my life's work, and I thank you for it. Visit patreon.com/radicalruss and become a Radical Russ Radio VIP today. You're listening to Radical Russ Radio, your source for marijuana music and cannabis conversations since 2008.
And now, another episode of Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre. I'm your host, Leonard Pinth-Garnell III. Tonight we take a look at one of the finest works in the cannabis cinema, 1996's Half-Baked, starring David Chappelle, as interpreted by the Royal Shakespearean Cannabis Theatre Company. In this scene, Chappelle's character, Thurgood Marshall, has just admitted his addiction to cannabis to a room full of narcotics addicts. One addict, played in the film by Robert Saget and interpreted here by the Royal Company's Sir Frederick Farrach, takes umbrage at the suggestion.
I find preposterous the notion that you, sir, may be addicted to cannabis. In times previous, I have undertaken lubricious endeavours, most revolting and unbecoming of a proper gentleman, in my servitude to the wicked powder of the coca leaf. Lo, that is an addiction whose chains would bind Hercules. At any point in history, could one identify a moment in your life so sullied by your ignominy as a cannabis slave? Methinks not! Boo this man!
For Cannabis Shakespearean Theatre, I'm Leonard Pinth-Garnell III.
The world of cannabis is evolving at a frenetic pace. The Russ Belville Show gets behind the headlines to take a deeper look at breaking news in our Cannabis Focus.
Well, today in the Cannabis Focus, we're looking at the state of Idaho, of course, where it has been a whirlwind marathon sort of legislative session. More bills having to do with marijuana in the state of Idaho than I can remember. And I got to tell you, in my 16 years of marijuana activism, I began in the state of Oregon and watched the medical marijuana program blossom and then move into a commercial program and then move into recreational legalization and its commercialization. I've also reported on or been a part of what's happened in Washington, Colorado, Alaska, California, Ohio, that didn't happen. A little bit on the East Coast with New York, with Massachusetts. And I've even covered international drug policy at the United Nations. And in all those 16 years, I can't think of another legislative body so terrified of the prospect of legalization as the Idaho legislature. It's just unbelievably embarrassing. So, of course, the session began with the ironically named C. Scott Grow. And it's funny that he became our nemesis because early on, before he was elected to his position, he was appointed to a vacant position. And of course, he was appointed by the governor, and consider that at the time he was appointed, he was a member of the general authority of the Mormon Church, which is kind of like their Congress, right? So we picked a high-level religious leader to be a high-level, senator in the legislature. Now, he won his election from his district in Eagle, but all during the election season, as we'd make our commute to the CBD store we co-own, we'd see these big signs that say C. Scott Grow. And we would laugh at them because it sounds, of course, like the Dick and Jane book. C. Scott Grow, grow, Scott, grow. C. Spot pee on the bush, whatever. So he's become our nemesis because we began this session with him proposing a constitutional amendment, SJR 101, a constitutional amendment to ban marijuana initiatives. Now, it was broader than that. It was basically take all the Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 drugs, put them in the Constitution so that you can't run a statutory initiative to legalize marijuana or ayahuasca or peyote or MDMA or psilocybin mushrooms, whatever. But we know what it was really about. It was about going after marijuana. So he went after marijuana with this SJR 101 constitutional amendment, and it got held up in the House because it went too far in trying to write so much into the Constitution. So he rewrote it. He came back and took another shot at it, rewrote it as HJR 4. Now, the Senate one, the SJR 101, actually got its 2/3 vote in the Senate. It passed the Senate, but when it got to the House, it couldn't get a 2/3 vote. So he rewrote it with HJR 4, trying to carve out enough exceptions to get the reticent Republicans on that side to vote for it. And again, it failed to get the 2/3 majority that it needed. So he was unable to permanently ban for all time anybody putting an initiative to legalize marijuana or legalize medical marijuana or even decriminalize marijuana on the ballot. Even though he didn't get the 2/3 majority, though, a solid majority is so frightened of the voters, because remember, the voters would still have to legalize. It'd still be up to the people. They're so afraid they'll do that they approved removing just that one solitary topic from all the countless subjects that we have the constitutional right to legislate. So since he couldn't get marijuana initiatives impossible, the next guy up was Senator Steve Vick. He has submitted a bill, the third bill, Senate Bill 1110, to just make them almost impossible. Okay, you can still petition on marijuana, but we're going to make it so hard that it's almost impossible. What he did is he doubled the legislative district requirement. The current law was 18 districts. I should say the past law was 18 districts out of 35. And now the new law is 35 districts out of 35, which just increases the cost and effort it will take to place any future initiative on the ballot. And that's the kicker, because our Idaho Medical Marijuana Act was cleared to gather signatures before SB 1110 passed by about 2 months. So legally, it operates under the previous rules. It operates under the 18 district rules. And that's where we get to the shenanigans that happened this week. It's almost as if they got an urgent memo from the retired Orange County cops that are pulling the strings now on drug policy. Hey, good job shutting down the initiative power, but you didn't do it quick enough because you didn't get the medical marijuana initiative. So Senator Grow, late Tuesday night, introduced a new bill, which ended up getting the number HB 403. And it just amends SB 1110 to say, oh yeah, by the way, it applies to every initiative this year, not just the ones after we pass this law. This is what we call an ex post facto law, trying to make a law that bans things in the past or changes the laws in the past, which of course is unconstitutional. And the Attorney General of Idaho has said that's his opinion, and it probably is unconstitutional. So I think that bill's been pulled But we will never know until they come back, because they're on recess right now, veto recess, waiting for the governor to veto bills so they can come back and override them. So they found the time in this crowded legislative session, record-long session, plagued with COVID. They wouldn't wear their masks, so they had to have a COVID break because too many of them got infected. And then they had to take time out to deal with the scandal of one of the Republican representatives allegedly raping an intern. But even amongst all that, they found the time. They found the time to come up with another bill this week, another one on Tuesday night, SB 1218. This is another Senator Scott Rowe special. And what it does is ban the advertising and promotion of marijuana for sale, cultivation, or distribution. It was printed at night, forwarded to the Senate in an unpublicized hearing the next morning, passed on the Senate floor in the afternoon, and forwarded to the House, all within less than 20 hours. Remember earlier I was talking about Minnesota going through 11 House committees? They can get this thing all the way through one chamber in less than a day. And despite the rush on that bill, and despite no public notice of it, no agenda posted for it, myself and 3 others still managed to be there to testify in person against this bill. The only people to testify for the bill or against the bill at all. So it was unanimous opposition to this bill. We emphasized that Senator Groh's attempt to ban Oregon marijuana shops from advertising in Idaho was written so broadly that anyone promoting marijuana legalization would be criminalized, which obviously violates the U.S. Constitution and free speech, right? And one of the Democrats even asked Senator Groh about this, and he demurred. He's like, well, that'll be up to the courts. We'll play that for you. That's coming up in the Radical Rant. We're going to actually play the hearing so you can hear him just hem and haw around taking away people's free speech rights. The fact is, the shops in Ontario, which is what this is all about, they're upset because the shops now are starting to set up, buy billboards. There's 9 different marijuana shops in Ontario, and they're all competing with each other, and they know where their customers are coming from. So they're starting to buy billboards on the freeways and the highways, and they're starting to buy sign wearers to walk downtown Boise and to hand out flyers. Now, they're not advertising their prices. They're not advertising, the use of anything. They're just saying, hey, we're a cannabis company. This is where we're located. That's it. And they're wanting to ban that. They're wanting to take your First Amendment rights away just because of that. They're afraid of that. We can't even have people talk about it. Don't talk about weed. Don't let people know legal weed exists. So because of these shops selling $10 million in marijuana a month, mostly to Idahoans who bring it back to Idaho to smoke, led Senator Patty Ann Lodge to introduce a solution in search of a problem. She introduced Bill SB 1150, Senate Bill 1150, and this bill bans petition signing outside the state of Idaho, which we didn't even know was an option. We hadn't even planned on doing any petition gathering outside the state of Idaho. We didn't think it was legal in the first place. Now we think it's legal just because obviously it must be if they're trying to put together a law to ban it. So the problem it ran into, it passed the Senate, it got through the Senate, got to the House, and it ran into a problem because we testified that, hey, you realize this would stop people who are on religious missions, like Mormons who go serve out of state for 2 years. They wouldn't be able to sign any petitions. Or Idaho National Guardsmen, they get deployed to Afghanistan for a couple of years and they wouldn't be able to sign a petition. And yet they'd still be able to vote on it with an absentee ballot. And besides, isn't there a 14th Amendment violation there? What about equal protection under the law? Why would I lose my Idaho constitutional rights just because I stepped over a line? So that held it up in the House, and we thought it was dead. But guess what? Brent Crane, again, this week, after all this delay and trouble they've had, they find the time. Representative Brent Crane, amended the bill to carve out an exception for the military and missionaries. Oh, okay. If you're serving God or you're serving your country, you get to keep your constitutional rights. But if you're just some atheist crossing a bridge to go buy legal marijuana, well, you don't get your constitutional rights, do you? And kudos to Representative Ben Adams, who passionately debated against this bill, making that same point, basically. Yeah, all I can see here is we're taking somebody's rights. Exactly. It still passed. It was like 35-25. It passed the House. Now it has to go back to the Senate to agree to it, which of course it will because it already passed a worse bill. So that's going to go to the governor. And even the one good bill they got passed this year, because there's 7 of them, right? The one good bill was HB 126. This was the industrial hemp bill that legalized hemp farming, finally, in the state of Idaho, ending Idaho's reign as the only place in North America where a farmer can't grow hemp, a non-drug. Now, even that bill had to be written so that anyone caught possessing hemp without a license can still be arrested for marijuana possession. It's just insane because every state outside of Idaho on every border has some form of legal marijuana. Nevada, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Canada. Utah's got medical marijuana. Wyoming's got CBD, and even their legislature introduced and passed out of committee a legalization bill this year. Kansas, the last place aside from Idaho that lacks some sort of medical marijuana law, Kansas, they've already passed a law. It's just sitting on the governor's desk waiting to be signed. Kansas will be a medical marijuana state. Our polling shows every demographic in the state of Idaho supports the Idaho Medical Marijuana Act, except legislators. Come on, Idaho. The latest polls show only 9%, not 90, 9% of America supports Idaho's criminal marijuana prohibition. Only 9% of people think that marijuana should be illegal for everybody for any purpose. That there should be no medical, there should be no legal. Only 9%. Idaho, you're on the wrong side of history and you can't stay there for much longer. It's time for a change. Help us place the Idaho Medical Marijuana Act on the November 2022 ballot. Check out idahocan.co/IMA, IMMA, or check out the campaign for the Medical Marijuana Act at Kind Idaho, kindidaho.org. We'll take a break, and when we return, you're going to get to hear that hearing and see Scott Grow himself.
Radical Russ here, reminding you that marijuana legalization doesn't just happen. Smart, dedicated activists have put their freedom and future on the line to make it happen. Like the activists at SSDP, Students for Sensible Drug Policy. SSDP alumni are now leaders in marijuana journalism at Marijuana Moment, Marijuana Government in Massachusetts, and even leading the Drug Policy Alliance. Get involved with the SSDP chapter on your college campus or form one. Everything you need to get started can be found at ssdp.org. And keep it here on Radical Russ Radio for conversations with leaders from this organization, the best marijuana music, and the latest news about cannabis.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number one.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
That marijuana, pot, grass, whatever you want to call it, is probably the most dangerous drug.
Some think there won't be room for them in jail. We'll make room.
I experimented with marijuana a time or two, and I didn't like it and didn't inhale.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
Radical Rant.
Ah, yes. In the Radical Rant today, we're going to take a listen to the Idaho Senate State Affairs Committee, where it was rushed into this hearing, a bill that was written the night before, SB 1218, from Senator C. Scott Grow, to ban the advertisement or promotion of the sale, cultivation, or distribution of marijuana for commercial purposes. I was there to testify against it, as well as Joe Evans from Kind Idaho and 2 fantastic volunteers for the Idaho Citizens Coalition who heard my call and came out to make 4 people in an uncalled for hearing, in an impromptu hearing with no public notice and no public link to the hearing. 4 people showed up to testify against it. They passed it anyway, but at least our voices were heard. Here is Senator Patty Ann Lodge, the chair of the committee, bringing the issue up to the committee.
We now have before us Senate Bill 1218, Senator Groh, Uniform Controlled Substance. Who seconded that? Welcome to the committee, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that. We had the print hearing yesterday, and so just in summary, again, the purpose of this particular legislation is to be consistent with what we do with tobacco. We don't advertise billboards, we don't advertise on TV, et cetera. And particularly part of the reason that all that came down was relative to minors. And so this bill says nothing more nor less than a prohibition for commercial purposes to knowingly promote or advertise sale of Schedule I controlled substances. And so with that, I stand for any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Are there questions of the Senator?
We should note that that the state of Idaho does allow tobacco shops to advertise that they exist.
Is there anyone who would like to testify on this bill? Did you sign up? Okay, I need the signature sheet. So, great, thank you. All right. Joe Evans?
Yes.
Yes, please. And please identify yourself, who you represent, maybe where you're from.
Hi, my name's Joe Evans. I represent myself as a concerned citizen. I grew up here in Boise, grew up in Idaho, went to school at Meridian High School, joined the United States Army out of Boise. Through the recruiters, went through MEPS here before going off to spend a lovely amount of time in Sandbox. I have an objection to the way this particular bill was handled. The fact that I'm even here shows, an awareness of what's going on and the way things are being handled. This meeting was scheduled at an odd time. The subject of the meeting was not posted until the very last minute. This is largely spitting on the entire concept of a participatory governance, as well as allowing the voice of public opinion, which I thought was one of those things that the party of Lincoln felt very strongly about. Now, aside from that, let's get on to the meat of the business of the bill. Okay, you cannot sell marijuana in the state of Idaho right now in any way, shape, or form, simply because it is a Controlled I substance and it is still illegal. It's been illegal for 97 years. And until someone does something different, it's going to continue to be illegal for, in the near future. So you're not actually stopping advertising from occurring here in the state of Idaho. What you're attacking is advertisers who are coming out of state. You are attacking individuals who are promoting the legalization of marijuana in the state of Idaho, whether that's for medical purposes, whether that's for recreational purposes. This is denying those people who are seeking legalization in this state an opportunity to promote their cause, because ultimately it can be perceived as going towards commercial purposes. This is a denial of First Amendment rights, as well as a blatant attack against participatory governance and the ballot initiative process.
Okay, thank you, sir. Your time's expired. Russ Belville?
Thank you, committee, Madam Chair. My name is Russ Belville. I'm a representative of the Idaho Citizens Coalition, which stands for the rights of 185,000 adult Idahoans who consume cannabis every year in this state. I'd like to echo the concerns of Mr. Evans that this is a sham of democracy to
post a bill late Tuesday night, post no announcement of when it's going to be heard, post no link for anyone to testify against it online, and require us to sit around in the halls for 3 hours to decide to see whether or not you guys were going to come here and have a meeting. But on top of that, I'd want to emphasize the problematic issue with this bill and the First Amendment. While it may be designed to prevent the advertising of the sale of marijuana in the state of Idaho, the language of the bill actually says advertise or promote. And it's more than just sale, it's distribution and manufacture, which also includes cultivation. So I'd like to know, if I have a collection of old High Times magazines and I want to sell them on Craigslist, am I guilty of violating this law for promoting the cultivation of marijuana? As someone who is a paid representative of the Idaho Citizens Coalition, standing up and trying to promote a initiative that would legalize marijuana sales, would I be in violation of this law? There's so many unintended consequences that you're facing from this. What if I'm a landowner and I want to sell some of my land to someone who wants to grow hemp on that land? Under the recently passed HB 126, hemp isn't hemp until you have a license. Hemp is marijuana until you have a license. So if I advertise for sale that I'm going to sell you some land that would be great for growing hemp on it, really I'm advertising growing marijuana until either of us have a license. Would that be in violation of this law? We need to think about the fact that marijuana, whether you like it or not, is legal in every state surrounding this state. And I know you don't like the billboards that are saying the names of cannabis companies or the people walking downtown that are saying the names of cannabis companies, but this could affect me simply wearing a t-shirt downtown that has the name of a legal cannabis company on it, because that would be promoting the commercial sale of marijuana. I urge you to reject this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Melville.
It's Belville.
Daniel, is it Porter or Potter?
One of the fine volunteers that showed up for us here.
Good afternoon, Senate.
Please identify yourself.
My name is Daniel Potter. I grew up here in Meridian. I also, like Joe, went into the United States military. I am a United States Marine Corps vet. And the reason why I'm here today is because I just wanted to talk about some of the difficulties that come with this bill. First things first, when I read it, I immediately thought, wow, this is a First Amendment issue. You know, as a veteran myself and realizing that almost 100 veterans were arrested last year for trying to self-medicate, I do promote it openly. In fact, I don't care if I get in trouble for it because I believe it's right. I believe it's a civil right. In fact, 91% of the United States believes it's a civil right. And so when I look at the language of this bill and it talks about promoting it, I'm not going to stop collecting signatures or talking to people about the benefits of its health or posting about it online. And if I get arrested for that, I don't mind fighting it in court because this is a civil right. And I don't, it's about God's people. God made this plan. You know, he made it for us. He made it to heal us. It's the healing of the nations. And I stand by that. One of the other things that I have a problem with this is it puts other things in danger, like the Hemp Fest that we want to do here every year in Idaho. We're only trying to help people learn about this plant. We don't hate anybody for not liking it. If you don't want to do it, that's okay. If you don't want it in your home, don't bring it. You know, no one's giving this to your kids. In fact, ironically, the best way to keep it out of kids' hands is to regulate it, because then people aren't going to the same dealers. 12-year-olds aren't going to the same dealers as 28-year-olds. They have to go, bring their license, and go through a registered process to actually get this process. On the other flip side, Idaho last year did spend its tax dollars putting up billboards for marijuana myths. So if we're not allowed to even promote it, should the state be allowed to not promote it? Because we spent our tax dollars putting up marijuana myths. One outside of my church out there at Calvary in Boise. Thank you guys for your time.
Okay. Thank you, sir. All right. Tyler? Tyler, I'm not sure exactly what your last name is. It's hard to read.
It's just as it sounds, ma'am. It's Booze. Tyler Booze, 9th District, Canyon County. I was just informed of this bill. I was over in Canyon County, actually, and Russ let me know, there was a possible First Amendment violation going on here. So, I decided to speak up. Someone who, represents the party, our views probably don't, jive on the marijuana issue, but when it comes down to it, should be able. I mean, most of the shops there in Nampa, they promote CBD, so why are they allowed to do that, on the roadside, but we can't put a billboard up? That's my only issue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. All right. Senator Groh, do you want to?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Is it all right if I asked a question to the
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Hello again.
Hi, Michelle.
A couple of questions I had on the bill. Since you have, for the purposes of this section, persons means any individual on behalf of corporation, business, trust, estate, and so on, are you saying that this bill would usurp any ability for a person to have control over their own private property?
Senator Groh.
Madam Chair, the reason that language is there is relative to this is a misdemeanor, and you can't really take a corporation and stick it in a jail or whatever for a misdemeanor. So the reason that language is there is to indicate if someone knowingly does this and violates the law, that individual who represents that corporation would be the one that would be held accountable.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Senator Stinnett.
So I guess my question then is, even if it's individual knowingly, or perhaps someone does this without the estate or corporation on their property, does this. I'm just trying to understand whether it's going over the top of any property this happens on, the individual who owns that property. You're making sure that private property owners are included in this punitive attempt if they put up some kind of signage.
Senator Groh.
Madam Chair, what this refers to is if there's an entity, a business entity that advertises, the entity is not held accountable. It's the individual within that entity that would be promoting or advertising.
And one more, if I might.
Senator.
Thank you. So is CBD also not, even if we have a lot of products that have hemp in them, to what degree does this control the ability to advertise CBD products?
Madam
Senator.
Chair, this is relative to Schedule I controlled substances, which are marijuana, meth, heroin, fentanyl, those kinds of things. Those that have been shown not to have medical benefits.
Just for clarity, Madam Chair.
Yes.
So then if CBD does have THC, then those would be exempted from this bill.
Senator.
Madam Chair, under federal law, any CBD that's less than 0.3% THC would not be affected by this.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's
Thank you,
weaseling
Senator.
because under state law, it has to be
Thank you,
0.0.
Madam Chair, and follow up on Senator Stennett's question regarding CBD oil and other hemp-based products. Under federal law, CBD oil could be sold with trace amounts of THC, but under Idaho law, any amount of THC constitutes a Schedule I drug. Is that not correct, Senator?
Madam
Senator
Chair.
Groh.
Madam Chair. Senator Burgoyne, this is directed towards the actual marijuana itself, the meth, the fentanyl, the heroin, that kind of thing.
Which is
That's
wrong
the
because
purpose of
meth
this.
and
Those
fentanyl
that
are
are
Schedule
promoting
II,
or
and this doesn't
advertising
affect Schedule
those
II
particular
drugs at all.
substances.
Madam Chair.
Senator Burgoyne.
And I noticed a number of times you've mentioned fentanyl. Fentanyl is a prescription drug, is it not?
Madam Chair,
Senator Groh.
if it's on Schedule I, it's a controlled substance.
Madam Chair.
Senator Burgoyne.
I'm confused. Can you explain? Fentanyl is fentanyl. The issue is the dosage, is it not?
I'm looking at, if I may, Madam Chair, looking at the code. This is 37-2705, and it lists Schedule I. There are 6 pages of listings of drugs that are considered controlled substances. If it's on one of those 6 pages, then it would be included in this.
Thank you, Madam
Are there
Chair.
any other further questions of the committee? All right, Senator Groh, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
I do, Madam Chair. If I may just respond to the commercial versus non-commercial speech. First Amendment rights are very clear on non-commercial speech. When it comes to commercial speech, the U.S. Constitution provides less protection to commercial speech than non-commercial speech. And there's several code cases I could cite. I'll just cite one. Central Hudson in 1980 has been the standard that has been, things have been based upon since 1980. That's been the governing thing. And as it says here, if it is an illegal activity, then it is not covered by the First Amendment and may be banned. And this is strictly referring to the promotion or advertising for commercial purposes.
Okay, thank you, Senator Groh. Any further questions from the committee? See none. Committee, you have Senate Bill 1218 before you. What are your wishes?
And we're just going to skip ahead at this point because they just go through the motions and then the vote, which ends up to be a 7-2 vote, the 2 Democrats voting against. To give it a do-pass recommendation, send it to the Senate. And it went to the Senate later that day where it passed 35-25. Now it has to go to the, it went to the House where it passed 35-25. It has to go back to the Senate for concurrence, and they most likely will because they're more reefer mad on that side of the state house. So, of course, Senator Groh is a bit disingenuous about what this bill would do. It's aimed at, like he says, somebody having a sign that says, go to Bob's Pot Shop in Ontario, we got $99 ounces. But the problem is nobody's been doing that. What people have been doing is just putting up the name of their shop. Like Bob's Pot Shop, 123 Main Street, Ontario, Oregon. And that is what's going to be considered for commercial purposes. Because he's going to say, well, that's that location. What do? All they do is sell stuff that's illegal in the state of Idaho. So it's just making it so the pot shops have to be invisible. They can't even dare speak their name in the state of Idaho. And why that becomes problematic is because we have events, we have hemp fests, we have town halls, all sorts of things that need donations, that need all sorts of money, basically. And so maybe these shops might want to make a donation, make a sponsorship. And of course, in return, they would want a shout out. Well, that shout out would be illegal because it would be promoting for commercial purposes this business that sells marijuana. And what we really worry about is it says the promotion, not just the advertisement, but also the promotion for commercial purposes. How could this be interpreted if someone is, say, a paid signature gatherer for a marijuana initiative that legalizes the sale, distribution, and cultivation of marijuana for commercial purposes? Is that not promoting the sale of marijuana? I mean, it gets real dicey as far as what they're trying to ban. And the other disingenuous argument, which we heard from Senator Anthony later in the testimony here, later in the hearing, was, well, we ban cigarettes. We don't let them advertise cigarettes. You can't advertise tobacco, which is true. You can't find billboards anymore for cigarettes for the Marlboro Man up there or anything like that. But you can certainly see tobacco stores. Tobacco stores are all over Idaho. Big Smoke, Smokers Access, whatever they're called. And they have big signs that say, that they're selling tobacco. We're allowed to know they exist. Senator Burgoyne brought up the point of the advertisements that you get in the state of Idaho for the fun bus that goes down to Jackpot, Nevada, where you can go do casino gambling. That's illegal in Idaho. But it all just comes down to the fact they're terrified of marijuana. It can't even be talked about because they know when we talk about it, we're winning. As my friend in the testimony said, only 9% of the American people think marijuana ought to be illegal for everybody for all purposes. No medical, no recreational. Stay tuned. Hour 2 is next. We'll talk more about these bills and what's happening nationwide and the future of the Russ Belville Show, Idaho's marijuana podcast. For everyone here in America's last absolute prohibition state, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it. You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down.